You're watching part 2 of a sansevieria video that is filmed with Oma Lien here in Jakarta, Indonesia. Oma Lien is a passionate and experienced grower of rare sansevierias. In the first episode, Oma Lien shared a little bit about the collection history, some of the flowering traits, how you hybridize them, and all that good stuff. So be sure to check out the previous episode. But in this one, we're going to be casually tour her extremely rare collection, and she's going to share a lot of care tips about these sansevierias. Here are some variegated sansevieria pinguicula. That used to be expensive around 3 years ago. Now, a lot of you guys have probably seen the regular green form of these, but the variegated ones are just so beautiful and stunning. Every variegation is different, and they're probably a lot slower growing because of the lack of chlorophyll. Now, these are actually the cylindrical or round leaf type sansevierias. There's many varieties within this type of sansevieria, such as this one here, which is the pinguicula crossed with a Tom Grumbly. This plant has the character of both parents, and it's actually not fully mature yet and can get much larger than this. Now, pictured on the right from this plant is one of the parent plants, which is a pinguicula. So some of the sansevieria variegation can transfer on to the child. So this is just what's happened in this particular hybrid. Now, this form looks a lot more like the Tom Grumbly if you Google up a picture of the sansevieria Tom Grumbly. Now, Oma Lien shared that in a contest setting, these plants are measured by height, which is the height of the plant at the current state of measuring, during the time of measuring, and this is from the top of the soil to the highest point of the plant. There are a lot of sansevieria contests throughout Indonesia and maybe the rest of Asia as well. I'm sure there would be some in Thailand, but these contests are categorized by size. So this plant that we're seeing here is considered a juvenile size. Now, these pinguiculas do put out stolons or runners, such as the one shown in the picture. This one plant used to be around $6,000 per plant, which is really insane. Now, these propagations are relatively easy because they already shoot down roots down below to the soil. If you look at one of the runners down the center of the screen, you'll see that root come down, and that is just how they do. So literally, they propagate themselves. And this is something that really blows my mind. Now, my dad did have a lot of these sansevierias, and I have actually nicked some of them and put them in my collection, and they have already started putting out runners. So I would say that they're not the slowest growers. Now, over here, we see them forming clusters. So if you leave them alone, they do form these wonderful, beautiful clusters. And because their edges are really sharp, it is very easy for them to damage one another. So they are kind of like frenemies, which means both friends and enemy at the same time. You have to really keep an eye out for these and move fast. If you see some of these spikes getting too close to one another, it is wise to move them away right away. If any of these sharp spikes do make a damage on any of the other leaves, this plant will be automatically disqualified from any competition. Now, I did mention competition a few times in this episode because they are a big thing here in Asia. Plants are put into these contests to encourage good growing practices and breeding programs, which can dramatically increase the value of that plant. If a plant has won a competition before, it is become way more valuable than they were before. However, Oma Lien shared that plants are separated or they're spaced out during this plant in Oma Lien's hand came from a hybrid. Now, there are usually a lot of siblings in a hybrid, maybe hundreds or thousands, and they would look wildly different from one another. This applies to all species, including our most favorite aroids like anthuriums. Hybridizers will typically pick out only 3 to 4 of the best ones that they like for their traits from out of these hundreds of seedlings. The rest are destroyed so as not to ruin the market. Oma Lien shared a story about a famous hybridizer here in Indonesia who didn't have the hearts to kill all his seedlings, so he grew them all out, and then at some point when it became unmanageable, he asked the assistant to dispose of them. However, it was disposed of into the assistant's home, so yeah. This goes to show that Indonesians can be very opportunistic, and sometimes hard decisions have to be made to protect our intellectual rights. This next sansevieria is a species rather than a hybrid. It is actually held up by support. In nature, they can trail down like snakes on its own, and it's only upright when it's a younger plant, and it can always snake around when you don't give it support. Unfortunately, we don't have the ID for this, but if you're interested, you could probably look around a little bit. But this is a very peculiar sansevieria that is adapted to live in its natural habitat. So there must be some kind of rock support or something that is trailing off of in nature. I asked Oma Lien if it's okay to have sansevierias in full sun because that is what I learned, and apparently she said she do not recommend it and it's best to give it a shade cloth for filtered light. Now, variegated sansevierias can burn quite easily under full sun and they cannot take a sudden temperature rise too. So not only is the light intensity a factor, but the heat and the temperature could also be a problem. Now, aglaonemas and anthuriums like about 50% shade, but conversely, sansevieria do only need about 20 to 30% shade, and that is about 20 to 30% protection from the sunlight. For sansevierias, top light would be ideal, and sometimes if you're not giving it top light, you may want to rotate it from time to time to encourage it to grow towards the light. Here Oma Lien showed the original vine of the plant, but as it started to bush out a lot, they actually used styrofoam and bamboo sticks to kind of manipulate the shape of the plant. Now this is next level sansevieria care because Oma Lien is growing these sansevierias out for competition. So her sansevierias are being treated and grown like bonsai. I'm actually a little bit blown away by this fact that we can actually manipulate the shape of the sansevieria to achieve a desired shape and size of the plant. And here I ask whether sansevierias have a robust or a large root system, and Oma Lien said yes, in fact they do have a lot of roots, especially when it's pinguiculas. They can get really thick and long. So you do want to give them a little bit of space in the pot for the roots to expand. This here is the Sansevieria aliensis, an extremely rare sansevieria that is extremely slow growing. It is native to a small region of Somalia in East Africa, and they have not found a variegated version of this plant. This is just how uncommon and slow they are to grow. Oma Lien said that this plant grows about one leaf every 2 months, which actually for me is pretty fast for a sansevieria. In my mind's eye, sansevierias are slow growing plants, but in her experience and her professional care, these plants actually grow quite fast. Oma Lien shared that this plant started out as 3 leaves, and in 6 months, this is what it looks like now. So it's actually growing quite beautifully if you ask me. For a variegated plant, and especially a sansevieria, I think this is pretty decent growth rate. Now, with 20 years of growing experience, Oma Lien has figured out the right conditions to have them grow fast. Amateurs sometimes kill them by over-fertilizing. Oma Lien shared that when they're young, these sansevierias, they do not need to be fertilized probably at all. Now, you do want to fertilize them when they have reached to a certain size, and you might want to water them a bit more, but when they're young and delicate, you do want to back off with watering and as well as nutrients. This next plant is the Sansevieria phenomenal. I believe it's a hybrid that is variegated. How beautiful is the variegation? Look at that. It's nice and milky in color. There's very little chlorophyll on this plant, and Oma Lien invited me to touch the leaf, and my gosh, it is rough. Normally when you think about these Sansevierias, you would think smooth leaves, but this is like sandpaper rough, which is really crazy. There are many Sansevierias that look like this, and the price is actually quite different for the smooth one. So these guys are actually a lot more expensive than the smooth leafed versions. Now, when you cut the top off, you can actually plant the top section of the plant. You can also put in single leaf cutting, but as you can see, when you release the plant off its apical bud, apical dominance, it starts to produce pups from underneath the soil. So you can see here, this is just a single leaf, and it's just put right back into the soil, and a lot of babies will come out from this one single leaf. And if you look at the mother plant, a lot of babies have sprouted, forming clumps down below. So this is one way that you can propagate Sansevierias, quite violently of course, but then this is also one of the most productive way to propagate them. That being said, mother plants like this can no longer be viable in competitions. This next plant is the Sansevieria silver blue variegated. This is probably a Kirkii variety. Look how stunning it is. It is very complicated with like lime green, some greens, of course some of this yellow variegation, and the edge is just so beautiful with this touch of like red and white. It is a priced variety and it costs around $330 US. And this variety, this is very interesting to me. It looks kind of like a court jester, you know, like the clowns back in the day. It's got those vibes. And if you pay close attention, Oma Lien found a leaf that fell off here, and then she will actually plant it somewhere in the next pot. And if you look closely at the screen, this cutting has already rooted. Sansevierias are absolute survivors. They are plants that really want to live. So Oma Lien here poked the hole on in a pot and just put the cutting in there, just stick it in and it'll grow babies out of it soon enough. And apparently the variegation does transfer over to the babies. She explained that she doesn't even need to take out any potting media or a new pot. Simply just borrow space with another sansevieria, just stick it in the pot and just give it time. Next, I asked Oma Lien about watering. In terms of watering, this is getting 20 to 30% shade from the sun, and keep in mind that this is outdoors with good airflow, so the following tip may not work for indoor care. For the entire collection, Oma Lien waters them every 2 days until everything is completely drenched. This means the leaves, the roots, the soil, everything. For larger plants in larger planters, every 3 days or so is okay. Keep in mind that Oma Lien here use very porous potting media, so if you're using a more dense type potting mix, you also want to adjust your water accordingly. I'm shooting myself in the foot now for not asking what her potting medium is, but I can tell that it is Pasir Malang, a local volcanic rock that has no nutritional value. There's also some burnt rice hull and some rice hull in here, and I believe in our chats, Oma Lien shared that she did add some manure into her mix, so they are actually full of nutrients, and she does repot them every 6 to 9 months to make sure that the nutrients are replenished. And here I confessed to Oma Lien that I was feeling overwhelmed because I did not know that so many varieties of sansevierias exist. There's so many different forms, colors, texture, and growth patterns. It does take a while to get to know them and select the right one. So if you're in the market for sansevierias, take your time to look around because there's just so many to choose from. And they make wonderful plant on the desk as well as for landscaping. This one here looks like a clump of bananas, and if you love symmetry, maybe sansevierias are also the right plant for you. Some of them have wonderful forms that organically grow into very symmetrical forms and shapes. And there are again many colors and different varieties to choose from. And some of them have these thorns that might keep neighbors or neighbors' children away from your yard. But if you see these little sansevierias, they all will grow up, they will become clumps, and they will grow large over time. So this is a plant that actually will get quite big if you give it the space and give it some time. Because when we look at them in stores or online, they come in these little tiny babies. So just keep in mind, they do get big over time and they become more beautiful and wonderful if you give them time and proper care. Oma Lien here showed me a plant that is actually a hybrid named after her. They have these cute chubby leaves if you look at it, and a really beautiful dwarf form. So it's basically called the Sansevieria Oma Lien. It's a Sansevieria black pinguicula, or black ping, crossed with something else that she can't remember. And this next Sansevieria is called the Sansevieria Blue Clone Variegated. It's putting out runners in a beautiful fashion if you look at it. It's coming off the side of the trunk in random areas, and it will form a beautiful clump over time, I can tell already. Here's another example of that same plant, but look, it's got different forms, it's got slightly different variegation. This one is a lot more elegant, even more so than the one we saw before, which is really quite fascinating. Next, Oma Lien shared an interesting tip. Some of these sansevierias that form clumps and throw out runners will look rather good in hanging baskets. So the pot that she's showing here has a rim, and that is actually meant for trailing plants. They will trail off the side of the pot. Unlike the regular pots we see without that rim, over here Oma Lien found a sansevieria that has compromised leaf. This was probably damaged during propagation when they were taking a cutting. So apparently you can actually take half a leaf, just cut it off right down the middle, and then plant it. They will put out a lot of pups, and Oma Lien said that they will all be variegated. And then I asked her, why not just cut everything in half, because that's what I would have done. And she said she didn't have the heart to do it because they are living things after all. This is a Sansevieria Douglas variegated. Look at how beautiful the variegation is, like highlighter yellow variegation with a slight bit of orange. It kind of looks like the Monstera Deliciosa Marilyn by Mr. Kunzo with that wonderful orangey yellow variegation. And one thing that I like about these Kirkii is these kind of reddish line at the edge of the tip of the leaves. Now keep in mind that these colors, patterns, and design features has a purpose in nature. They all evolved for specific reasons, and most of these reasons are still unknown to us today. This next plant is a Sansevieria trifasciata that has mutated, so it is actually curling in on itself. Now we do find these in aroids as well, and apparently these mutations are quite stable because they keep putting out leaf after leaf that is mutated. In this case, for the trifasciatas, they can only be propagated by separating the pups, because if you propagate them by taking a leaf cutting, they will come out with straight leaves and also all green and non-variegated leaves. Now in Plant Daddy podcast, they mentioned about a chimeral behavior in the Sansevieria trifasciata variegated, and this is why their variegation doesn't transfer off to the offsprings when they are propagated just by the leaf. Here are some uncommon Sansevieria trifasciata varieties. This is the Gold America. This is actually a little bit more expensive than the ones that we're used to. There's some differences if you look at it carefully than the ones that are grown commercially in landscaping. And here is the Sansevieria Whitney, a hybrid that came from Malaysia. This is also very understated kind of hybrid. It could be good for landscaping because it doesn't take attention away from the yellow, like the yellow variegated sansevierias. The green on green variegation is quite stunning. According to Oma Lien, these guys produce pups very quickly and is very easy to care for. And in the screen now, she's taking one pup off and she's gifting it to me, which is very generous. Thank you so much, Oma Lien, for this gift. I am speechless. This is actually quite beautiful. And usually when people give me gifts of plants, those are the ones I cherish. And if like a fire break out in my house, those are probably the plants that I would take because they have stories behind them. Like the people who gave it to me will live on in my collection. So thank you so much for this gift. This next one is the Sansevieria bonchalensis silver. Look at how gorgeous it is. They look like little clumps of random bananas, but they form such beautiful clumps when you put them together like this. I don't think they get big, but then they really can spread out if you put them in a pot. Really stunning, and if you examine the details and the design, it's really unforgettable. And these guys, these little dwarf sansevierias, look at how small they are. They stay quite small. And Oma Lien said that they are actually suitable for hampers, gifting, like weddings and things like that. This size may also make these plants suitable for like office, like desktop plants. However, we do need to give them excellent care in these situations. In low light, we do need to rotate them to give them some light during watering days. They are nature's air purifiers and can come in handy in this office or indoor type air-conditioned situation with very little air circulation and a lot of dust and pollutants and things like that. So yeah, if you tuned into the last episode, we reminded the viewers that sansevierias are known to be air purifiers and really good for indoor spaces and cleaning the air. Now this next sansevieria is a kind of trifasciata. Now if you ask me, this looks like the leaf of a Dracaena white aspen, and I have a video on that because the leaves look very similar. It's got this beautiful milky variegation, and this plant actually came from Malta, which is an exotic place. However, she does not like that this plant does get droopy over time, so the leaves start out upright and firm and then they just flop over. Personally for me, I think this would look good in a hanging basket perhaps, although some might find it strange to have sansevierias hanging in a hanging basket. And behind this, we see a lot of cylindricas. These are actually very common. Some of them are beautiful. And Oma Lien just gifted me another one. This is a pretty rare sansevieria. So I really am grateful for this gift. I'm speechless. And this is one that I will care for and remember for the rest of my life. Thank you so much, Oma Lien, for this gift. Next, Oma Lien showed us a rotten leaf. So this is one of the older leaf of this plant, but it is soft and mushy. And she said you really want to get rid of this ASAP, and you really do need to spray some fungicide on the wound so that the infection doesn't spread. And the fungicide that she used is called Dithane. It's a popular brand here locally. And will you look at this glorious sunset? It is actually the evening and we're just about done wrapping up with filming. There are some sansevierias here that are grown in full sun. They are, I joked, punished to be left out here because they've ran out of space, but also they're leaving it out here to see which ones of them can survive. And if you look closely, the leaves are bleached, so when you put any plant in too much light, they will become this light green, almost yellow on the leaves, which shows signs of stress. And sun stressing the plants like this may be a way to select naturally which ones of them can survive and which one of them won't. And this one here is screaming, "Save me, save me," look at that. So yeah, they're not doing so well, but sometimes when you run out of space, that's what happens, and you just do want to subject your plants to a bit of abuse to see what they can take. We also learn as much from plant abuse or plant mistreatment as much as we do from good practices. Final question before we close. I asked, are sansevierias nutrient-hungry plants? Do we need to fertilize a lot or do we need to go easy? According to Oma Lien, go easy. Sansevierias have their own way of life, their own growth speed. We cannot push them along. We cannot subject them to like something that is unnatural. They have their own reproduction rate as well. However, they do need vitamins and right watering, etc. So you do need to fertilize them, but you do not need to do so excessively. In fact, a lot of her customers has killed sansevierias from over-fertilizing. And one last tip before Oma Lien, they hate the rain. If it rains like 5 days in a row, like 5 days straight, you should probably get them out of the rain because they will rot. Now, moderate rain is good for them because rainwater has some nitrogen in it and it unlocks nutrients within the soil. But as we mentioned in the last episodes, these guys do flower and thrive when it's the dry season. And with that being said, I think Oma Lien has shared a lot about sansevieria care and propagation tips. I want to thank her for her time, and I really overstayed my welcome here because we ended up filming for a few hours, and I know that Oma Lien is probably very tired at this point. So thank you so much, Oma Lien, for sharing everything you know about sansevierias. And for those of you who are still watching, thank you for watching this video all the way to the very end. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.